Greetings everyone. The topic for today's video is the great irony of overall feminist policies and what they supposedly set out to do versus the ultimate outcome on relations between men and women as a result of feminism. And so I'm far from the first one to talk about this, where you have this irony about feminism saying that it's going to liberate women from their traditional gender roles and that it's going to help women achieve gender equality and it's going to benefit women's overall condition and state of affairs, where in reality, men are the ones that have been more liberated from their traditional roles. Men are the ones that have had more options opened up for them. Men are the ones that, as a result of feminist policies, are now in a position to do other things besides be providers and protectors, or besides try to make women happy on a regular basis. Men are the ones that have come to realize, at least in larger numbers, that they have other options available to them, especially in the long run, especially after confronting the reality that exists in a post-feminist society where you as a man are pretty much going to be treated poorly in a lot of cases, almost no matter what you do. I'm far from the first one to point out that while feminism was supposed to liberate women, the feminist movement has actually done a lot more to liberate men in this regard. And rather than looking at the short-term supposed goals of feminism, this is more about the long-term effects. This is about the impact of feminist policies on the gender dynamic, regardless of the original intent of feminism. And there are those that have basically said that, well, feminism, the entire goal was to make it to where men and women couldn't get along, or the entire goal was this sort of attempt to install the government in the role of being the father of the family unit. And there are arguments you can make about that. I tend to agree with that second point of view in particular, and you could talk about the business aspect of it, where you can now cut wages in half if women are going out into the workforce in almost the same numbers as men. Now you can basically decide, well, there's going to be a situation where the man is no longer the only one that needs to work in the family. The woman has to work too, just for the family to get by, and that benefits those that control most of the ongoings in society, whether from the perspective of corporations and big business or the government, right? I'm not trying to say that capitalism in itself is bad. I'm just simply pointing out that this benefited the ruling class. And you can talk about how that was supposed to be, but I think to a large extent, the idea of men walking away from women was unexpected. I don't think that that was the intent. The intent was to get women to vote, to get women to participate in the workplace, to get women to prioritize themselves, so that you didn't have men standing in the way of the ruling class basically doing what they wanted to do with the populace in general. But I don't think that it was really intentional to create a scenario where men could just choose to walk away from this entire state of affairs. I think that that was a byproduct that was unintended. I'm sure that there are those that would disagree with that within the men's community and say that the whole goal was to get men to stay away from women so that society basically would end up in decline and eventually collapse, and the demographics would collapse as well because you wouldn't have enough people making babies. I don't think so. I think that the ruling class pretty much didn't intend for this to happen, but either way, regardless of the original intent behind the origins of feminism, and depending on whose view you want to look at, whether it's the women that were trying to advocate for their rights or special privileges, if you want to see it that way, or whether it was, again, big business and the government and their perspective on giving women the vote, regardless of why it ended up this way, men are now in a position to basically make other choices for themselves. They're in a position where no matter what they do, they're seen as bad in a lot of ways. So why be a family man? Why invest in this system? Why consider having kids or getting married in a situation where you can be kicked out of that family unit at any time because the woman decides that she's not happy? This whole process specifically has involved telling women that they should do all the things that men can do, and they can do whatever they need to do for themselves without a man, while providing men with ample reasons to give up on conventional relationships and live for their own sake. This is what's happened regardless of the original intent of first wave feminism, and then from that point onward with the other subsequent waves. The end result is that women are now trying to act like men in terms of taking on those roles, whereas men really don't have a reason to take on those roles as being providers and protectors so much. Ironically, the more radical that our implementation of feminism has become, the more encouraged men are to go their own way in some form, while women are saddled with more negative outcomes in the long run. Women are the ones that have this very anti-male, I don't need a man point of view until they're in their 30s and 40s, and then they want to try to find a guy that they don't really respect to settle down with. They end up divorcing that guy in many cases. They end up alienating the kids from that guy because they really never liked the guy to begin with. They just settled in their own minds. And what ends up happening in many of these cases is women are miserable, and the guys that manage to avoid that entirely, or maybe had a divorce early on in their life and recovered from that, they are doing their own thing. They are happier and finding a path towards fulfillment if they're doing it right. I'm not saying it always ends that way, but there's at least a potential for finding that sort of fulfillment in other things, whereas women that just continue to buy into the anti-male narrative, the anti-male way of looking at life, they are oftentimes alone, miserable, continuing to double down on feminism, continuing to double down on this idea that men are worthless to them, that they are happy being single and not having a guy around, whereas men actually have far more of a capacity, I think, to find happiness being alone, to find fulfillment in doing things other than investing in a family or getting married and being part of an institution that is basically a scam from a man's perspective today, or more or less even living with a woman or putting themselves in a situation where your home life can be so easily destroyed by a woman because you invite her into your home, and now the way the domestic violence laws are, the way that gender roles typically work out, you're relegated to your man cave while she owns the rest of the house in a lot of cases, in a de facto sense. And so men used to, before feminism became reality, before feminism essentially won and became the dominant gender ideology, men used to willingly take on many responsibilities that frankly made life better for women. But there is no real reason to do this in a post-feminist environment where mutual benefit between a man and a woman is largely a thing of the past, where the thing that is offered is basically you as a guy, you need to do all the things you used to do, and then you need to do half of everything else, and then the woman can use the family court system to get half your stuff anytime she wants. Basically, remove your children from your life, make up whatever she wants to make up without any sort of criminal standard of evidence being necessary in those family court situations. Basically, you as a guy, you need to do all the things that men used to do, but also everything else. And at the same time, women don't need to do anything for you. It's sexist to expect a woman to make you a sandwich or get you a beer, but paying child support and continuing to do so for kids that turn out to not even be yours, that's just what a real man's supposed to do. And there have been court cases where a judge has said, well, you've paid child support all this time, and it turns out your wife cheated on you, but you just get to keep paying anyway. But asking a woman to make you a sandwich is considered sexist. And I've talked about this over and over, to be fair. We have a situation where gender roles are that one-sided and unbalanced. We have a situation where there's this idea that women deserve, without any qualifications, the right to abort a fetus based on whatever's convenient to her, but men have no reproductive rights at all, and that's supposed to be okay. If a woman lies to you about a child being yours, or if a woman lies about being on birth control, or if a woman does any of a number of conniving things, that's okay. We don't have a problem with that. You're just not supposed to basically stick your dick in crazy, and that's the extent of your reproductive rights as a guy. But as a woman, you have the right to abortion of convenience. And now that that has been even partially taken away in the United States, at least at the federal level, even though at the state level, in most cases, you still have that right, it doesn't matter, right? That's a travesty. That's a great injustice. But you as a guy, you don't need any reproductive rights. How dare you? That is the situation at hand. And as guys have figured out, wait a second, why do I want to have a family again? Why does it make sense to raise kids that can be taken from me by the woman through the state? Why is it that I need to continue to try to see myself as a family man when the woman doesn't have to do anything for me and there's no reciprocity that's required? There's no mutual benefit? Unless, the woman actually decides to give me mutual benefit and she actually treats me well, but as soon as I get married, she can just cut that off and no longer basically do anything for me that enhances my life. As guys figure that out, they can just opt out of this thing entirely, and there's really no reason not to unless you feel like you have to have kids. There's really no reason not to unless you can't find anything else to basically live for. And it used to be in a traditional system, despite the flaws and problems with traditionalism. I'm not saying we should go back to this system for the people that want to misconstrue what I'm saying in relation to that. But at least there was some benefit. At least there was some reward. It was your family. She couldn't just take off and leave and take the kids with her without legal consequences. At least, even though you were the provider and protector, you had someone to take care of the home. Now, women aren't expected to do anything for you. And so again, I'm far from the first one to talk about this within the men's community, but this has enabled men and empowered them to use that same sort of feminist rhetoric to actually make better choices for themselves over the long run, to choose to opt out of a system where no matter what you do, it's wrong pretty much. Again, it used to be that a so-called good man would be respected if he was part of that traditional dynamic. But now there's no respect for you no matter what you do pretty much. If you are a male feminist, nothing that you can do can make up for the patriarchy supposedly oppressing women throughout all of history. If you're conservative, if you're traditional minded, then you're seen as sexist and just wanting women to be back in the kitchen and be barefoot and pregnant. If you do decide to choose your own path, then you're going to be looked down upon for that. Right? It's just all a matter of eventually you as a man are going to get spat in the face by this society because you basically don't have any sort of positive role to play anymore. And so since there's no upside to playing this traditional role as a guy, you now have the choice to pivot towards something else that can end up being a lot more fulfilling. And so that's the message of this video. Feminism has ultimately led to more misery for women, while men are increasingly finding other activities to live for as a result of what feminism has done. Whether that was the original intent or not, it's actually liberated men far more than it's helped women in the long run. Women are ending up in a more miserable state of affairs because they bought into the whole just have a career, you don't need a man, you don't need kids way of thinking, and most women are not really inclined to that type of lifestyle the way that men are. And yet, men now really have it up to them to seek out something new, and that something new can lead to something that you actually find fulfilling instead of being defined strictly as a family man or as a traditional guy, because that no longer has any sort of weight for guys that figure out where things actually stand today. There's no reason to be that guy and sacrifice the things that you might have wanted to do with your life for the sake of a relationship anymore, because that relationship can just be ended by the woman anyway. Your kids can just be basically used against you anyway. A woman can make a false accusation and get you kicked out of your own place anyway, or get you fired from a job in that situation. And so, again, to wrap this video up, guys have actually been helped out by feminism in a way if you can withstand the short-term negativity, if you can withstand the adjustment of moving on to other things in your life, guys actually can benefit from this current situation in our post-feminist reality in the Western world today, whereas women in the long run are going to end up miserable. And that's the great irony of feminist policies, is that feminism claims to want to help women, but in reality, it's equipped men to make better decisions for themselves in the long run. Given the circumstances at hand, men now have no reason to be part of this system that seeks to exploit them, whereas women are opting into the system and are ending up miserable in many cases as a result of going through that process and trying to, at least in some ways, do the things that men used to traditionally perform.